For me, this is not normal politics anymore. This is not left versus right. This is good versus evil. Yeah. I am deeply, deeply worried. We're talking about a real chance of an authoritarian breakthrough, an utterly unhinged kind of politics.
So the trend at the moment is nationalism, selfishness, if you like, with a vengeance. How do you break through to that?
It is not enough to just check your privilege. You also got to use it.
Hello and welcome to the Fourcast. With the world still reeling from Donald Trump's tariffs, there's more bad news as the International Monetary Fund has slashed the UK's growth forecast and says that the global economy will see a significant slowdown. Add to that wars in Europe and the Middle East, climate change, and the promise and the peril of AI. Is it possible to find hope amongst this constant chorus of doom and gloom? Well, one person who thinks they might have an answer is our guest today, Rutger Bregman, a progressive historian famous for taking on the Davos billionaires. Rutger, good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
So one of the reviews about your book said it was wonderfully dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Is it dangerous?
It is a
You'd
bit
like
dangerous.
It to be dangerous.
It is a bit dangerous.
What's the danger?
It encourages people to join a cult, if you will, of radical do-gooders who want to devote their career, their lives to some of the most pressing issues that we face as a species. I think that the waste of talent that is currently going on is one of the greatest wastes of our time, even worse than plastic straws, if you will. Mm-hmm. The book is a call to arms for the best and brightest among us in particular, who are currently often, stuck in consultancy jobs and finance jobs and corporate law jobs, and I think they could do so much more good.
They might really like those jobs.
Well, maybe some of them do, and maybe they like the paycheck in particular.
Yeah. And you think that's wrong?
No, not necessarily.
Right.
I am just inspired by examples throughout history of elites redefining what it means to be successful. I mean, in this country, the United Kingdom, we've seen the greatest movement for human rights this world has ever seen, the abolitionist movement. Yeah. I'm personally from the Netherlands, and we didn't stop, the slave trade or engaging that because we thought it was bad. The British forced us. Mm-hmm. So I spend a lot of time studying that movement, and I realized...
And you write about it, of course, in your book.
Yeah, exactly.
Moral ambition.
And I realized that it was part of a bigger societal shift that was all about redefining what it means to be successful and living a different kind of life.
So is the key to this book that you're appealing to essentially smart people, who've got excess intelligence, excess capacity, excess energy. You think they're using it in the wrong way and say, come on, get on board for something that you will feel... that will make you feel good about yourself, that you might be remembered for at the pearly gates.
Yeah. I think the most ambitious people should be working on the most important global problems. It's as simple as that. We've got currently three types of waste of talent. We've got people who aren't very ambitious and aren't very idealistic. They're stuck in the so-called BS jobs. Mm-hmm. It's a highly technical term, that scientists use to describe those socially meaningful, meaningless jobs. And it's about 25% of the population, according to a big survey.
Give us an example of that job.
HR managers, marketeers, consultants, corporate lawyers. I mean, a lot of people stuck in cubicles. And it's not me saying it about their jobs. That would be unfair. I mean, people can be the judge of the social value of their own job. So it is people saying it about their own work. I think that's tragic. But we also have a lot of people who are ambitious, but not very idealistic, right? And then we talk about all these Harvard graduates, the Oxbridge graduates who could, build a rocket that brings us to Mars, but instead they become quants or something like that.
And where does a historian or a journalist fit into that category?
It depends on what they work on, obviously. So I wouldn't want to live in a world without historians. Right. I think that history has a lot to offer us, especially right now as things are quickly getting darker. Yeah. We like to think that we are so exceptional. I currently live in the United States, and I mean, that's a country in particular that likes to think that it is very exceptional. But
exceptionalism can be a dangerous thing.
Yeah, and we've seen these things before. We've seen democracy breaking down before. And we need people to take a stand against that. But I'm also quite critical of some of my friends on the left and some progressives who are maybe idealistic, but not ambitious at all. Mm-hmm. We've got so many people who are utterly obsessed with their own footprint, for example. They don't fly, they don't eat meat, they don't use those plastic straws. But in the best possible scenario, they have a footprint of 0 and they might as well not exist, which is not very ambitious to me. And same is true for all those educated elites who spend a decade policing language, saying you can't say this, you can't say that, you have to use all the right words to describe all the injustices in the world. Well, that's also not very ambitious, and that's not how you actually help people.
So where does someone like Elon Musk fit into this, rubric? Because I mean, here's someone who's trying to fix the problems of the planet, trying to fix the problems of industry, of vehicular traffic, and is trying to fix the problems of government, he would say at the moment. Not everyone would recognize that, but that's what he would say. And he has been rewarded, quite lavishly by shareholders.
The question is, are we talking about Elon Musk pre-Twitter or post-Twitter? I think the man sadly went nuts. But before that, you got to recognize that he built two amazing, amazing companies. And I'm often quite frustrated by, again, some people on the left who say, oh, he's fake, he's not smart, he's just doing it with government subsidies or whatever. I mean, obviously, he's taking billions of dollars in government subsidies, and that's exactly what it should do. That's what those subsidies were intended for. And he built an amazing company. Like the whole transition towards electric cars. Thank you, Elon.
But he's trying to apply the same principles to slimming down government. Now, you could say that he's doing a terrible job of it, or he's being dishonest about it. But in his own mind, as someone who's maybe heard your clarion call to be ambitious and morally ambitious, he thinks he's doing the right thing. And I just wonder if the problem is that what is moral ambition to one person is morally reprehensible to someone else. And it's very hard to find a common denominator.
Look, I'm not a moral philosopher, and I don't want to get into a boring debate about what is morality, what is good.
But your book is called Moral Ambition.
That's true, but I think that a lot of us are on the same page. So I think that a lot of people will agree that the fact that 15,000 kids die today from easily preventable diseases is not very good. The fact that we are utterly unprepared for the next pandemic is not very good. The fact that 80 billion animals are slaughtered every single year and live in pretty horrific conditions in so-called factory farms is not very good. So I don't try to be very controversial here. I'm mainly saying, like, these are clearly very big problems. These are very talented people. Like, maybe those people should do something about those very big problems.
So we have these incredible, global challenges, which we keep talking about, whether it's, the promise and the peril of AI, whether it's climate change, whether it's the next pandemic. And yet at the same time, what we're seeing is that national borders, personal borders, walls, frontiers are popping up left, right, and center. So the trend at the moment is nationalism, selfishness, if you like, with a vengeance.
Yeah.
So how do you break through to that? Because that's not just about you're wasting your life. You're much too clever to be a consultant.
Yeah.
It's, you need to have a different mindset. You need to cheer up a little bit.
Yeah.
Be more positive. That's the tricky part, isn't it?
I am unashamedly cosmopolitan. So I take inspiration from the great abolitionists who came before us, the suffragettes who fought for the women's right to vote. And what I see in that history of moral progress is the drive to expand the moral circle so that we don't just care about our own people. I mean, I'm a father. Obviously, I care much more about my own kids than other kids. But I also have the ability to expand my moral circle. And I have a career anyway, so I might as well do some good with it. And indeed, if you want to have the biggest possible impact, then often it does make sense to have a more international perspective.
I know you had a falling out with Tucker Carlson. Once Trump's favorite journalist. But I mean, if you look at the Trump world, I know not everyone's bought into it. He has divided the world. But the point is that there are people who firmly believe in the United States and even elsewhere that his particular brand of politics is the answer to our problems of not just prosperity, but community, family, all these things.
Yeah. And that's the fundamental political divide right now. It's on the one hand, you have a zero-sum worldview, the belief that, if other people come into your country, they only come to take things away from you. With everything I have in me, and I think this is true for a lot of other people, we want to fight against that because it's not, in my view, not true. I am deeply, deeply worried. As I said, I currently live in New York. I sometimes got the feeling that Europeans don't always realize just yet how bad the situation is. We're talking about a real chance of an authoritarian breakthrough in the next couple of years. I live there, on an immigrant visa. People are kicked out left and right if they are critical of the regime currently. That's what's currently happening. For me, this is not normal politics anymore. This is not left versus right. This is good versus evil.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we'll talk about left and right in a minute because those labels seem to have been diluted somewhat. But there's a reason why Trump got elected the first time, I mean, slightly less convincingly, and the reason why he got elected a second time more convincingly. And there's a reason why, he has this extraordinary following. I meing, it is a cult-like following.
Sure.
You talked about a cult at the beginning. And I think those people, I just wonder how you break through, whether you should even bother, where you're bothering to break through to those people who voted for him to say, I want to understand why you're so angry, and then maybe we could use that rage in a different way.
So I
worked
at a journalism platform for a long time in the Netherlands where we would always say, like, we need to break out of our bubble. And I was always like, should we really? Like, I want my friends to read my pieces, and very often they don't even. So in this book, I am talking to my own people because I'm frankly a bit angry at them.
Right.
So many of us...
You're angry with your own people or the other people? Or
my own people,
or
yes.
both people? Yeah.
Because many of us went to great universities. Maybe we went to Oxford or Cambridge, and we wrote these application essays when we wanted to get in. And we said that we were going to, make a massive difference. We were going to take on global hunger. We were going to build affordable housing. We were going to accelerate the clean energy transition. And look at us. What are we doing? So I'm not really interested in preaching at MAGA people or anything like that. I think
you want to preach at your own people.
Exactly. And I think a big reasons why progressive...
And do they find that really annoying?
Yeah, sure. But I guess I'm more effective if I am trying to convince people in my own circle than if I, And by the way, half of the country already has an essential job, right? Yeah. Teachers, plumbers, nurses, care workers, they don't need some lecture about moral ambition from me. I have been incredibly frustrated by the purity politics that's been so dominant on the left. We talk about it, the policing of language, the utter inability to actually build things, to actually achieve things. I think we got to have a real honest conversation about why has government become so ineffective, for example. We can say, clean energy now, but if it's actually illegal to build because of all kinds of red tape, etc., well, that is a problem. Why does so many talent flow to the private sector or to Silicon Valley, for example? Well, because you can still build in the virtual world, right? You can still build with bits and bytes, but you very often can't build with real bricks and mortar, right? That's become very problematic, both in the UK, in the US, in Europe. So got to have an honest conversation about that. If you don't fix real problems for real people in the real world, then at some point they get very angry and they start voting for, people who don't have the best of intentions.
But fixing real problems, we call it, here we love to talk about fixing potholes on the streets. Build, housing, all these sort of basic things, infrastructure, roads, better plumbing. This is also the kind of stuff that Donald Trump talks about.
Yeah, he talks about it. He talks a lot about it. Doesn't do much, right? I think we can now see that there's no real economic plan here. I've actually spoken to quite a few entrepreneurs also in Silicon Valley who are more on the right side of the political spectrum, who are feeling quite a bit of buyer's remorse. It's been... if the situation wasn't so bad, it would be funny. What we now have in the US is court politics. You have Donald Trump at the center of it all, and the people who are best at sucking up to him, well, they get, a little bit of candy. You wave with a letter from the king or something like that, and maybe that works for a while. But this is the situation we're in. It's an utterly unhinged kind of politics.
But it's also a cult, isn't it? And it's a kind of revolution. And in a revolution, what happens is that when the revolution doesn't work, mostly, history tells us, they double down on the revolution. There's more revolution. It becomes more radical. And then maybe at some stage, there's a correction of course, or there's some bloodletting, or there's a counter-revolution.
Sometimes. So I think a hopeful example is Poland. Poland also had a lot of democratic backsliding going on. A very right-wing populist government that was in power a couple of years ago, trying to end basically the balance of powers and the power of the courts. Then there was a big coalition against it, from the left to the center to the moderate right. And I think that's exactly what we need right now. All great movements in history, honestly, have been coalitions. It's one of the things that again, my friends on the left are not always the best at working together with people who don't share all their opinions. But it is very important. It's what you see when you study those abolitionists, for example, the great coalition between the Quakers and the evangelicals. You see it in the civil rights movement. People like to think that, they were so radical and purist. No, not at all. They're super pragmatic. And I think that's what we need again today.
What's really interesting in America, and you see it to some extent here, in Europe, is that the storytellers that have captured the moment are the storytellers that are angry, the rageful storytellers, mostly on the populist right, but also on, look at Germany, on the populist left, there are plenty of those who've kind of ignited the imagination of young voters. Where's the optimistic storytelling in modern politics? The kind of things that you refer to in your book. I see there the essence of what could become.
So I think you're on the wrong track there. I think you're on the wrong track. So it's not 2015 anymore. It's not a time where you say, we're going to do good by doing well, and let's give a TED talk about it and bring the community together and have some nice conversations.
I'm not referring to that.
I think this is a time for, maybe you could call it moderate anger, right? You can still be angry at the state of the world, but still be, how do you say that? Sensible and moderate and compromising in your approach. I'm very angry about what I consider the betrayal of elites. We have so many educated elites, and their big betrayal is not a lack of empathy, a lack of listening to Trump voters or reform voters
you're saying
or whatever.
Match their anger with my anger. That's what you're saying.
I think that sometimes there's justified anger that can motivate people, because here, as I said, the big betrayal is the lack of actually contributing to the common good. So
that is the betrayal?
Yes.
Of the elites.
Exactly.
What other people like to call the elites.
Yeah. And honestly, for me, writing this book, writing about moral ambition also, impelled me to take a long, hard look in the mirror. I've spent a decade of my career in the awareness industry, standing on the sideline, giving my opinion, looking at the people who are in the arena doing the actual work. And I started experiencing this emotion that I like to describe as moral envy. I think more journalists could use some moral envy because, for us, and I guess I'm not really a journalist anymore.
I have no idea what you're talking about. What is moral envy?
It is just looking at those people who are doing the good work, who are taking the risks, who have this entrepreneurial approach, who don't always succeed, who have to sacrifice, who fall and then stand up again. It's something I deeply admire.
Just getting back to the sacrifices that you're asking people to make by giving up, that job in consulting or banking. I mean, a lot of jobs that you would classify as kind of relatively useless, let's say, or the world would continue spinning without those jobs. Those are jobs that don't pay particularly well, but they pay enough to pay someone's mortgage, to provide, 3 square meals a day. And I mean, when people are squeezed economically, do they then still have the luxury to think about doing the morally right thing or not?
Money matters. Margaret Thatcher had this excellent saying when she said that the Good Samaritan didn't just have good intentions.
He had cash.
He had money as well, right? And in the fight against some of the biggest problems we face, we need money. So I co-founded an organization called the School for Moral Ambition. We like to see ourselves as the Robin Hoods of talent. We take away these people out of the Bermuda Triangle of talent, consultancy, corporate law, and finance, and we convince them to work on some of these most important things. For example, the fight against the tobacco industry is one of the causes we took up in Europe. What you quickly realize if you're working on that is that there's a total lack of capital here. So there, what you also need is entrepreneurial people, people who have built great companies, scaled those companies, who climbed the first ladder of success and who are now like, okay, let's use that capital to make a big difference. Again, abolitionists, suffragettes, they weren't financed by the government. They weren't financed, with some fancy corporate ad deal or whatever. No, they were financed by brave individual philanthropists. So money is important.
But, especially in America, where philanthropy is also tax deductible, there's an awful lot
now, actually.
Well,
Trump is going to crack down
he's going to come. I'm sure he might do. I wouldn't be
Yeah.
surprised at all.
Yeah.
But, there's some very, very rich individuals, and you've met them, and they show up at Davos and they say, we want to be taxed more. We want to pay more money in taxation. And indeed, many of them could. And they wouldn't be missing meals if they did. But they're not the real challenge, are they? The real challenge is the people in the kind of lower tiers who don't earn that much money, but there are millions of them. And you need safety in numbers to actually affect change, don't you?
I'm not certain.
Really?
There's a great quote from Margaret Mead the anthropologist who once said that we should never doubt that small groups of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. So Peter Thiel, the right-wing venture capitalist, has this great saying that he says, what's the opposite of a consultancy? Well, it's a cult. It's a small group of people who are really committed to an ideal that they're willing to fight for. Now, that's not necessarily good. You could argue that some of the worst dictatorships started as a cult. But it's also true for some of the greatest, most beautiful movements we've actually seen.
But then it rubs up against democracy, doesn't it? You could argue, for instance, that climate change, driven by a small number of committed people, is a kind of cult. We see the scientific sense of it, et cetera, et cetera. Trump comes along and says, this is all, a lot of BS. You who still drive your diesel-powered truck in Wisconsin, you should be giving your vote to me and not to those other people. And climate change, in America at least, is now a dead agenda.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the problem, isn't it? You may sneer at the kind of vast majority. You may not need them for your project, but they still have the vote and they can upend your best intentions.
Sure. But how...
So you do need to persuade
How
them.
did those ideas enter the mainstream, It was a small group of very committed people. And it started in the early 70s. So back then you had a corporate lawyer named Lewis Powell, who was actually on the board of Big Tobacco. He had spent much of his years railing against the scientific evidence on the dangers of smoking. And he wrote the so-called Powell Memo, which is today seen by historians as the blueprint for corporate Americans' political takeover. And they built this whole ecosystem, the Heritage Foundation, the American Enterprise Institute, many political action groups. And they had an incredible perseverance to really change the country, in my view, for the worse. But there's a lot to admire there as well. I mean, this is what it takes. Back then in the 60s and the 70s, most people were social democrats. They were Keynesians, followers of the British economist John Maynard Keynes. And they really succeeded in, creating this political revolution. So that is honestly what it takes. That's the kind of perseverance that you need. And what I see on the other side of the political spectrum is not nearly enough of that. So I see people who are, who think on like a monthly basis or even a daily basis. They have a project here or there. They're not really serious about building coalitions. They're also not really serious about getting the necessary capital to actually build a counter movement. And that's what we need if we want to be morally ambitious about this.
What I'm hearing from you, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is that, basically there should be a sort of almost a right to rule for smart people. Smart people with talent should run the show, and less smart people should basically trust in those smart people to run the show better than, the messiness of democracy.
Yeah,
because the messiness of democracy produces things like Donald
That sounds
Trump.
Like Plato to me, like we need philosopher kings. No,
that's not where you're coming
from. I
from.
think we have to be very worried about that kind of society because very smart people are less smart than we like to think they are. I am saying, though, that it is not enough to just check your privilege. You also got to use it. We live in the reality that some people just have much more wealth, have much more talent, much more cultural capital or access to certain kind of networks. I'm saying use what you have to make a big possible difference and to move towards a much more equal and equitable world. I think we got to work with the world as it currently exists. I would love to live in some kind of utopian paradise. I don't think we are there nearly yet.
And just finally, the phrase "as it currently exists" is sort of up in the air because AI is in the process of changing that existence, perhaps in a very revolutionary way. How does AI fit into this greater sense of moral, ambition and personal sacrifice? If AI comes along and says, I can do all that so much easier, so much more cheaply than you can.
Yeah. So for a long time, experts, historians, sociologists, economists have been predicting that the robots would come and would take over our jobs. I think we should never underestimate capitalism's extraordinary ability to come up with new meaningless jobs. Currently, it's about 25% of the workforce. That number could come up quite a bit. I think AI will force us and hopefully also help us to rethink the whole structure of our economy, basically. I think the time will become ripe for something like a universal basic income.
Yeah.
I think that'll be essential. I think we will also
Do you think that'll work?
Oh, absolutely.
Universal basic
Wrote a
income?
whole book about it.
I know, but I'm just wondering, at the moment we're finding it very difficult to give, people benefits when they can't work or find it difficult to get work.
Yeah.
because we feel that actually everyone should be working, for their own crust.
Yeah.
If you're putting people on a universal income that has to be paid by someone, I can see the discontent now.
Yeah, and there we need just a quite different system of taxation. So currently we mostly tax labor and we don't really tax capital and wealth. That needs to be completely turned around because capital is going to be the great producer of wealth. It's going to be these machines. It's going to be these robots. So if we don't tax that, then how are we ever going to finance the welfare state or anything else we care about, the roads, fix the potholes, etc. I think that's really essential. But I'm not just talking about the redistribution of wealth. I'm also talking about a redistribution of talent, because actually since the 70s and the 80s, ever since the tax rates for the rich have been going down, we saw this talent shift as well. It has become more attractive to go to Wall Street, to Silicon Valley, to the city here in London, to work in those jobs that are less socially meaningful. And I think that a more reasonable system of taxation, where billionaires, for example, actually have the same effective tax rate as middle-class people, wouldn't that be nice? I think that will lead more people to work for the government, for example. I think it should become much more prestigious and normal if you are, someone who wants to build things, that you go and work, become a public servant.
Just one final thought. Those tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people on universal basic income, what will they do all day long? Play video games, go ballroom dancing?
Yeah.
I mean,
I had a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun for another book looking at all these predictions from the past. So John Maynard Keynes famously said that we would have a 15-hour work week in 2030. Isaac Asimov, the great science fiction writer, he said that the great challenge of the future will be boredom. Bertrand Russell, the philosopher, also thought that this was going to be a big thing, and that the lost product of civilization will be figuring out how to spend our time wisely when the robots will do our work. I'd love to have that challenge. I think we can figure it out. Maybe we got to ban TikTok, but
a bored planet could be a dangerous thing.
Yeah, that is that could be one of those challenges of the future, indeed.
Rutger Bregman, author of Moral Ambition. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
That's it for this edition of the Forecast. Until next time, goodbye.